And Ambassador, let's taking a big picture look at this. How significant is this ceasefire?
Well, Jose, hello. It is very significant.
Let
me give a shout out to Special Envoy Amos Hochstein, who did a Herculean job cobbling together this ceasefire. What the Biden administration, of course, hopes is that this ceasefire, if it is durable and is able to preserve a return of civilians, not only from southern Lebanon, but also civilians back to their communities in northern Israel, that it can leverage this to force Hamas back to the negotiating table and reach some sort of ceasefire agreement in the south. I'm skeptical whether that's possible. Israel has already declared that it will not cease hostilities in Gaza, notwithstanding the cabinet's agreement to begin withdrawal of IDF forces from southern Lebanon, number one. And number two, ultimately then the issue is, what will Iran do to thwart these ceasefires? All roads lead to Tehran, Jose, and until Tehran ceases and resists further rearming Hezbollah and Hamas, I'm afraid that this truce may not last very long.
Mike, yesterday President Biden said the U.S. will help ensure this ceasefire is enforced. What could that look like?
Well, Jose, a key part of the negotiations that led to this deal began, in fact, just days before the presidential election here in the United States. Amos Hochstein, mentioned by the ambassador there, was summoned to Israel by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to say essentially that after months of hard work diplomatically by the United States, not just to bring about a deal, but to prevent this situation from escalating further, the Prime Minister said he saw a window of opportunity to get to that deal. So what followed was intensive negotiations that included a role for the French, President Biden speaking on Friday by phone with French President Emmanuel Macron to talk about the ways in which those two countries would add to an existing mechanism to be sort of an intermediary should potential violations of this ceasefire occur. Now, this is going to take 60 days to get into a place, but it's a part of a deal that the president hopes is durable, as he laid out yesterday when he spoke about this from the Rose Garden. Take a listen.
The fighting across the Lebanese-Israeli border will end. Will end. This is designed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities. If Hezbollah or anyone else breaks the deal and poses a direct threat to Israel, then Israel retains the right to self-defense, consistent with international law.
Now, the president making those comments just before leaving the White House to travel here to Nantucket. He also insisted that no U.S. boots would be on the ground, although U.S. officials later did say that they would play a role in offering assistance to the Lebanese army, which certainly needs that assistance. Now, we also learned this morning from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan that he was briefing the incoming Trump administration team about the parameters of this deal as it came together. Ultimately, it will fall to them if this deal remains in place by the January 20th to continue to play that supporting role.
Ambassador, how much of a factor was Israel's systematic destruction of Hezbollah infrastructure in making this deal possible?
No doubt about it. And that is one of the reasons why there's such conjecture within the Israeli public whether or not the ceasefire deal was a right deal to do at this point in time, because the IDF was already on the cusp of doing significant and major damage to Hezbollah's military capability. But yet, at the same time, Hezbollah has been able to continue firing rockets from north of the Litani River into Israel. So while at the same time IDF has done significant destruction, Hezbollah still has significant missile capability to attack Israel should the ceasefire fail.
Mike, President Biden also spoke about the continued fighting between Israel and Hamas.
Over the coming days, the United States will make another push with Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, Israel, and others to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. With the hostages released and the end of the war without Hamas in power, that becomes possible.
Does the White House see any real possibility of an Israel-Hamas ceasefire and the return of the hostages?
No doubt, Jose.
The administration is a big believer in
I'm sorry, Mike first. I'm sorry, and then Ambassador. Actually, let me ask you, Mike, to do that, because Ambassador, I have something I want to ask you on behalf of Mike's answer.
Sure thing, Jose. Well, the White House is a significant believer in the power of momentum, and they do hope that this is the beginning of further momentum in the region. There has been no greater political toll, perhaps, on this administration over the past year than the crisis in Gaza. And in 54 days, of course, the president is going to be continuing to devote his full effort. Jake Sullivan saying that work begins this morning to get to that ceasefire agreement. One of the reasons why there is optimism, Jose, is because a key breakthrough in getting to this agreement was that Hezbollah in Lebanon agreed to no longer link a potential ceasefire with a similar arrangement in Gaza. To the U.S. officials, that means it only shows that Hamas is further isolated. In that situation, they had been the main barrier to an agreement, and they think that now there will be continued progress. The other piece, Jose, that is so important to this administration is getting input from other regional stakeholders to have a plan now to rebuild Gaza after a ceasefire were to come into place. That is also a key ingredient of what the president hopes to do in his final weeks in office.
And so, Ambassador, taking off of what Mike was just telling us and your comments earlier about the influence of Iran in all of this, they remain that same regime that has been in power since 1979 with the same objectives and mission statements. Is there any possibility of any true peace or even recognition while Iran remains the same?
No, there's no doubt that, unfortunately, the Biden administration never really had, over its 4 years, a coherent policy on what to do about Iran's continuing terrorism, not only against Israel, but against United States forces in the Middle East. And until Iran is forced to cease and desist, supporting the proxies that it created in order to destroy Israel, let alone, of course, Hamas and Hezbollah, but also the Houthi rebels and the Shiite militias in Iraq, we're going to have to push further for a far more sophisticated long-term policy to undermine the Iranian regime. That's the only message that they'll understand, and that's the only way that Israel is going to be able to have peace both on its northern border as well as in Gaza.
Hala, politically, where does Netanyahu stand, and is there any possibility that he could be in favor of some further movement with Hamas diplomatically?
So it's not just Palestinians who occasionally will blame Prime Minister Netanyahu for moving the goalposts on any ceasefire negotiations with Gaza, but it's also Israelis themselves, and specifically the families of the hostages. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been seen internally and throughout the region quite often as a leader who has gotten in the way of getting a ceasefire deal over the finish line. Yes, Hamas has been intransigent. Yes, there have been issues with that organization, that terrorist organization. But there has been a lot of blame also leveled at Prime Minister Netanyahu. For example, I can give you a specific example. When there were ceasefire negotiations several months ago, and one of the requests was for the IDF to evacuate what is known as the Philadelphia corridor, which is that strip of land that divides Rafah on the Egyptian side from Rafah on the Gaza side. And the Prime Minister was extremely unwilling to move on that, knowing that that would probably torpedo a ceasefire deal. Now, as far as whether he is willing to use the momentum that has been gained through this ceasefire deal with Hezbollah, well, we just need to listen to what the Prime Minister himself told his countrymen and women yesterday in his address. And he said, for me, the war is not over. For Israel, the war is not over until we completely defeat Hamas. And completely defeating Hamas is something that is an extremely tall order, as many military military experts will tell you a Hamas insurgency will continue for a long time, even if the military rocket, if you will, capabilities of the group have been neutralized. So there you have your answer, sort of in a longer-winded way, perhaps, than you would like to. But essentially, it seems very unlikely that there will be a ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel, at least in the next 54 days.